Eyes of the Wulfswēard. The forest was dark, despite it being the first month of Leotsumr. The sun barely penetrated the thick canopy, and by the great boulders and narrow passes, stubborn fingers of snow still clung on from winter's grip. Beornwulf glanced back down the winding path, now guarded by a stone gatehouse. The archway stood empty, marked with a sculpted warg's head mounted high over the entry. Rain streamed from the snarling mouth of the beast and ran over the lascannon muzzles built into the newly reinforced bunkers, Godric's gift, replacing the old wooden palisade Braylon had once raised here. He absently touched the ring on his finger, brushing across its worn engraving, the warrior ring of his oaths. Beyond, the fields now thrived where once they had burned under orc shellfire. Here and there, a small eagle scuttled through the new grass, nosing for fungal gestation pods, remnants of the orc invasion long ago. Over the decades, the eagle had boomed, cleansing the land in a way no shovel or flame could match. Beornwulf smiled at that small blessing. It had been a long road from the day a young preacher had first shown him the Aquila. That preacher was now a bishop, and the wild-eyed warrior who had once stood alone with 5 others against the orcs was now chapter master of the Void Revenants. The world had changed, but it had grown too, and today he returned to this place to honor a promise made in blood. Never swear what you won't keep, son, not even in jest, his father's words, and he had never broken an oath yet. One last vow needed to be honored before he led the chapter into the storm. The rain fell steadily even beneath the canopy, icy droplets joining the snowmelt. In the distance, runoff from the mountain torrents had turned the gentle brooks into roaring whitewater rapids. This was the season of change, the single month of Ethanlang, when the iron winter of Leotnit surrendered to the pale warmth of Leotsumr. He moved easily through mud and lichen, his Astartes armor gliding around him with an ease that had taken weeks of practice. His lungs drew in the cold air, implants analyzing every trace chemical. His hearts beat steady and strong, even if still faintly sore from the final surgeries to seat the new augmetics. It should have healed faster, but he had ignored the Wulfswēard's order to rest. There was too much to do. Yes, Flottwēard Edric had handled the complex merging of the two navies, and Godric had secured defenses, while Osric seemed to appear daily with some new improvement to weapons or armor. But leading a chapter was more than signing off crates of bolters or blessing starships. What made a Space Marine chapter was its warriors. That was Beornwulf's burden. His black carapace flexed comfortably for the first time in months, moving like a second skin beneath the rune-inscribed plates. The Gasthelm system still felt unfamiliar, but he had forced himself to master them. The Revenants would need to be spectral, silent, more warg than knight, so he had practiced until he could move through woodland as softly as any scout. Through the trees, he heard the brittle crack of a fresh branch, far to his right. The Hearthguard, Wulfgar's chosen, were never far from him these days. They annoyed him, but after the Drukhari assassin had nearly ended Wulfgar's life, he had relented. They moved in cataphracti plate, white as ancient statues, etched with new forged runes and bones of fallen brothers. Yet they slipped among the tree trunks with surprising stealth, their only sound the occasional snap of a twig or the faint rattle of purity seals. That made Beornwulf smile, just a little. He pushed forward deeper into the rain-soaked woods. At last, he heard what he had come for, the crack of an axe splitting wood with a clean, brutal stroke. The tall woodsman behind the blow raised his axe again, arms corded with broad tribal tattoos, muscles rippling beneath the ink as he drove the blade through another stubborn log. Beside the rough-hewn hut, furs stretched on racks, dripping in the rain, while a smoke pit hissed steadily, sending fragrant pine up toward the canopy. A massive warg sprawled on the porch, eyes half-lidded and yellow like molten gold. It did not stir, but watched him, ancient, slow, aware. The two leaner wargs, circling restlessly by the hut, turned their heads sharply as Beornwulf approached. Their tongues licked over jagged teeth, claws flexing in the damp earth. They waited. Beornwulf stepped into the clearing with no attempt at stealth, the rain drumming on the blue runic plates of his Gasthelm cataphracti. Bone charms swung gently from his belt, alongside the tusks of the Jotunbars, trophies of 100 victories. He paused at the edge of the clearing, letting the Hearthguard halt behind him, unseen but near. He heard a storm bolter click, the faint snap of an arming fuse seating in an assault cannon, but he raised a gauntleted hand, signaling them to stand down. His steps were calm, steady, one hand resting on the hilt of his power sword, though the weapon felt wrong to him. Power swords were too delicate. A Sikh's was simple, honest, a strip of black skyfall steel, no power cell to foul. Chainswords could be reloaded as easily as a bolter, snap in the fuel and go. But power swords? You had to unscrew the pommel, swap the cell delicately, guard against oil or rain ruining the charge. And a bolter, reliable, but if it failed to penetrate, it did nothing. A Serpenta, at least, would blind, burn, or cripple even on a glancing hit. He paused, thinking. Then, deliberately, he unbuckled the power sword and dropped it into the mud. The gold-chased bolter, marked with a warg's head, Wulfgar's gift, followed it. He left only the Siax on his belt, and a free hand within easy reach of the Serpenta pistol his Modor, Archmagos Voratrix, had given him. Perhaps she had known him better than he knew himself. His other prized weapon, the Sildathnidal, was still with Osric, who had taken it for study long ago. That left him with the simplest steel, and that was enough. The wargs watched him, massive paws shifting, eyes wary but no longer aggressive. Feolumair set another log on the block and drove the axe through it with a savage crack, the wood splitting apart like a broken shield. Rain and sweat streaked the old scars on his face as he finally looked up, calm and measuring. Queen Hildilith fell, the woodsman rasped, voice like old oak. That news came here, but I know no Beornwulf of Silthdale. Beornwulf drew in a long breath. He had expected this would not be easy. He stepped forward again, boots sinking in the mud. Instantly, the two lean wargs snapped forward, flanking him, hackles rising, fangs bared. The massive beast on the porch padded closer, a low snarl rolling from its throat. He kept walking, calm, one hand resting on the Sikhs. The lead warg froze. The others backed away, licking their jaws, uncertain. He stopped at a respectful distance. Close enough to speak, far enough not to threaten. I am Neatwortha's king, whether you like it or not, he said steadily, and the Arcana Inclusium is mine as well. He doubted Feolumair would understand what that truly meant, but he pressed on. And you do know me, Feolumair, son of Wulgan. We fought side by side once, when I was nothing but a Wigathine with a borrowed blade. Now, as king, I tell you, Neatwortha needs you again. Feolumair shifted, resting the axe across his shoulder, gray eyes thoughtful, rain dripping from the iron band in his beard. You took down the great orc with your bare hands, he said evenly. Beornwulf grinned, water running down the lines of his helm. I ran out of blades, he confessed. Feolumair snorted, almost a laugh, then nodded toward the wargs. You have the half-machines now, he grunted. Void Wigathine, Ironsides, what use for creatures of teeth and claw, what use for a woodman? Beornwulf spread his arms, the bone charms clacking against his chest plate, the runes flaring faintly with each breath. You have never fought monsters of myth or men who carry their oaths burned into their hearts, he answered. Your claws are worth more than 1,000 blades if they strike in loyalty. For the first time he noticed among the drying furs a Drukhari helm nailed to a stake, a skull still inside the thin silver mask, half broken. Over the doorway, a Drukhari blade was nailed into the wood, gleaming. Beornwulf's grin widened. Perhaps, he thought, Feolumair had already fought monsters of myth after all. Feolumair barked a short, rough laugh, like a wolf challenging the night. He leaned the axe on his shoulder, studying Beornwulf with a wry half-smile. Beornwulf stepped closer, voice steady. I want all the sons of Nitwertha to stand together. The Void Revenants are yours, just as they are mine. It is time we face the enemies of our world as one people. Feolumair shook his head, sending rain flying from his braids. When enemies come, he grunted, the tribes deal with them. The wargs deal with them. Only a fool goes searching for a fight. Beornwulf raised a brow. That is true in the forest, he allowed, gesturing to the trees around them. But out in the void, Feolumair, you can see your enemy long before he passes between the trees. The woodsman frowned, spitting into the mud in a gesture of warding. Maybe, he growled, the Imperium should have left this place alone. Then no predators would have seen Nitwertha and come sniffing. Beornwulf sighed, a deep rumbling breath that rattled the bones tied to his plate. I agree with you more than you know, he admitted. But the broth is spoilt, Feolumer. We still have to drink it. Feolumer looked away, rain rolling down his face, tracking the old scars that crossed his cheek. Without a word, he stepped to the doorway of his hut and lifted something from a small shelf. It was a handheld welding torch, marked in worn brass with the seal of the Adeptus Mechanicus, bearing the cog symbol of Magos Ductora Cogitatus Tiberius. The handle had been broken long ago, replaced with carefully knotted sinew and a carved bone grip, but the device still worked. A little puff of plasma energy sparked from its nozzle as he tested it. He hefted it toward Bornwolf. "The metal man came to us once," he said, a distant look in his eyes. "The one they call Magos Tiberius. Wanted to learn how to train a warg." Bornwolf nodded slowly. His uncle. He'd seen the wargs Tiberius kept near the forge and wondered many times where they had come from, but had never asked. Clearly, he had come here to trade for them. Feolumer let the welding flame fade, gazing down at it, thoughtful. "It would take a week in your great forges to do what this thing can still do," he said, voice softer. "We are not savages, Revenant. We understand the gifts your Imperium has brought." He looked up then, rain hammering on his broad shoulders, the lines of his face drawn in hard reflection. "But if there are beasts in this void forest of yours," he continued, a growl of iron in his voice, "perhaps it is time the Wudawara joined the hunt." The great warg on the porch raised its head at that, golden eyes flashing with a predator's knowing, and Bjornwolf smiled, rain running off his helm in thin streams like tears. "Then, Feolumer son of Wolgan," he said, voice carrying through the storm, "walk with me, and let us hunt together." Feolumer studied him in silence, the rain beating steadily on the rough hide stretched over his hut, the smoke pit guttering with every fresh gust. He looked down at the welding tool in his hand, as if weighing something far older than iron, then back up into Bornwolf's eyes. "I will come," he said at last, voice calm and deep. "I cannot speak for the Wudawara. They are free folk and will answer their own hearts, but I will tell them what you ask." Bornwolf inclined his head in quiet respect, the runes on his breastplate shining faintly as water coursed over them. "That is all I ask," he replied, simply. Feolumer stepped forward, close enough for the rain on Bornwolf's pauldron to splash against his arm. "You will find," he added, with a grin half like a snarl, "that the Wudawara remember debts, and we remember kin." Behind them, the wargs let out low, rolling growls, not of threat, but of promise. Bornwolf smiled, feeling something steady settle in his hearts, something right. "Then gather your blades," he said, "and your fangs." The great warg on the porch lifted its head, yellow eyes shining with uncanny silent approval. Feolumer slammed his axe into the chopping block, letting it stand, rain running down the polished haft. "I will come," he said again, firmly this time. "Tell your king," and here he laughed, glancing at the bone-charmed cataphractii waiting among the trees. "No, tell yourself. When the forest calls, the Wudawara will not hide." Bjornwolf nodded, then turned, gesturing to his hearthguard to form up. The white-armored giants moved forward out of the gloom like ghosts, weapons slung, respectful and silent. Together they stepped back into the rain-lashed path, the green fire of their helm lenses shining against the gray. "Until we hunt," Bornwolf called over his shoulder. Feolumer stood with his wargs, watching them go, the echo of a half-forgotten oath burning again in his heart. Bjornwolf made his way back through the dripping canopy, the cold rain rattling on the runes of his plate. His stride felt easier now, whether from the healing resilience of his gene-wrought flesh or from the lifting of some hidden burden on his heart, he could not say. His hearthguard followed behind, their presence a silent shield. He thought of Feolumer, of the wargs, of the promise he had renewed. The first of the Wulfswēard, he thought with a small, satisfied grin. Of all the titles claimed or devised for this chapter, many born in the mouths of Wulfgar, Osric, or Elfstan, Wulfswēard was purely a Werthen word, and it pleased him that the first to name it had been the chapter master himself. He pushed forward, boots crunching wet undergrowth, until something gave him pause. It was not a feeling. Exactly, he was a warrior, not some forest seer, but rather the absence of feeling. The living forest had a chorus, the scuttling of tiny claws, the shifting of leaves, the endless, half-heard movement of life. Now there was nothing but the hush of rain, the steady footfalls of his hearthguard behind, the drip of water from his pauldron, and then ahead a figure emerged. Tall, clad in pale blue plate worked through with steel gray, the icon of the Void Revenants on his shoulder, his armor draped with soaked robes that clung to the runes stitched across their hem. A great power stave rested in his right gauntlet, its blue capacitor coils humming faintly. Beornwulf's stern face broke into a smile. "Brother Elfric," he called out, stepping forward, his voice carrying easily through the rain. The Wulfswēard inclined his head, water sheeting off the hood of his robes, his bionic eye glowing faintly. "My lord," Elfric answered with calm solemnity, his staff tapping the earth as he advanced. "What brings you to the forest, Wulfswēard?" Beornwulf asked, tone light, though he felt in his bones that the answer would be serious. Elfric paused, glancing past Beornwulf toward the forest path where Fiolumer's hut lay hidden. His breath steamed in the cool air. Elfric's chest felt heavy. He had spent many months wandering this world, trying to find solace in his own company, to soothe the bitterness of his posting. Everyone in the chapter knew the tale. It had become a legend. Wulfgar himself had written a lay about it, Elfric the Doubter, or Elfric Twogan in Werthen tongue. At first, Elfric had been outraged to hear it sung in a smoky tavern in Denyu Werda, believing it an insult. But when he listened properly, he understood. It was a celebration of his struggle, not a scornful rebuke. He looked across to Beornwulf now, the man he had once dreamed of displacing. A barbarian Hleyford raised up from orphanhood by a wandering archmagos, a man who could hardly scrawl his name in High Gothic, who wore the Otenbar's tusks over his aquila, bone charms made from Drukhari foes dangling from his harness. Every warrior of Nitwertha bore rings forged from the weapons of defeated enemies, yet Beornwulf wore only one, a simple ring, etched with a great serpent of local myth, too large for any human finger. It had been made as a talisman to carry the boy into death, for no one thought he would live, and yet he had lived, grown, and taken that ring with him to the stars. Almost mystically, it fit a space marine's gauntleted finger, as if it had always been meant for it. Elfric remembered the day Mentis had ordered him to this emperor-forsaken world of endless sea and mud. "Your place is there," the Iron Father had told him. Looking at Beornwulf now, a warrior wearing a ring meant to be his funeral token, who had raised a chapter from nothing, Elfric could see those same words applied. A wave of shame ran through him, remembering how he had once craved Beornwulf's place, had even imagined unseating him. Yet that same hand, wearing that ancient ring, had pulled him from the brink of death, with a laugh and a comrade's slap on the shoulder. How the sands of fate could shift. He dipped his head in a respectful bow. "Lord, I heard you were alone in the forest," he lied smoothly, "and I know these paths well. I came to see you were safe. There are wargs about." Beornwulf laughed, throwing his arms wide as if to embrace the rain. Behind him, the hulking, white-armored shapes of his hearthguard waited in the shadows. "Oh, I am never alone these days," he said, chuckling, "and I doubt my hearthguard would let me get into too much trouble. As for wargs, that's why I'm here. I came to recruit them and the Wudawara." Elfric nearly choked. Recruit wargs, those filthy, stinking beasts of wet fur and bone-cracking jaws? Their breath alone could stagger an unhelmed warrior, foul as a rotting corpse. And the Wudawara? These tribals were even rougher than the local techno-barbarians. Daubed in flour grease and bear fat, their furs caked in centuries of smoke and sweat. Some wore hides that had never seen a river. Stinking of carrion and dog, Elfric's stomach turned at the memory of them. Worse still, the wargs were psychic blanks. His powers meant nothing against them. The doubter within him reared up. Was this what they had come to? He had envisioned the chapter as something mythic, awe-inspiring, a force of ghosts and steel, like the Silver Skulls, but mightier. But wargs? Barbarians? The dream soured. It was becoming more like the warband of a half-mad chaos warlord than an Astartes chapter. For the barest instant, his thumb twitched toward the ignition rune on his power stave, a tenth of a second's clarity. One barbarian, one squad of Hearthguard. The forest was deep. Who would know? These were warg-haunted woods, after all. But the moment passed. Cold, crushing shame swept through him like a wave. Beornwulf reached him, clapping a huge gauntlet on his pauldron so hard the servos whined. Thank you, brother Elfric, he laughed, but a good lie all the same. Elfric reeled slightly under the blow. Lie? He stammered. Bjornwolf only grinned wider, tugging Elfric closer by the edge of his rain-slicked cloak, heavy arm resting across his power pack. I already knew, Bjornwolf explained. Archmagos Pyrvox paid a visit to brother Osric, and his news arrived ahead of him. Elfric's mind spun. How? Lord? Bjornwolf's grin widened, fierce and good-natured. The deacon keeps me informed of all the little games the ecclesiarchy tries to play across the reach, and I agree with old Pyrvox. This business on the Manifold Dawn border is exactly what the Void Revenants were founded to handle. It is time we made our presence felt. Elfric took a slow, steadying breath. Yes, Lord, he answered, falling in at his side. Rain still drummed down from the high canopy, hammering the plates of their war armor, washing mud and blood alike from the runes. Together they began the march back to Knitward Hal, towards the chapter's future, wargs, tribals, ghosts, and all.